Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Got another great video for you all this week exploring biodynamic practices with my dear friend Jeff Poppen, author of the new book, Barefoot Biodynamics. In last week's video, Jeff gave an overview of what biodynamics looks like on his farm, and this week he's going to dive into the individual preparations and how they are used. Now, I've always had a lot of really great biodynamic products over the years, from wine to cheese to produce, so I've long had a lot of affection for the methods based on the results, and have even used biodynamic preps from time to time on my own farm. As for Steiner himself, the originator of biodynamics, I guess I kind of always thought of Steiner as an eccentric philosopher who was somewhat caught up in the esotericism popular at that time. That is, people just like to be a little bit out there, but also a person who had some interesting views on agriculture. I suppose to me, because Steiner wasn't a farmer, biodynamic practices have always felt like a sort of documentation of peasant farming practices at that time, ran through a pretty eccentric filter. What I was not aware of until our amazing commenters pointed it out last week, which we really do have a smart and thoughtful comment section here, something I'm sure you hear all the time on YouTube. But what I learned was that Steiner held some troubling anti-Semitic and racial views that are pretty indefensible. Like many ideas and tools and methodologies that come from an earlier time, biodynamics has a bit of a problematic history in that way. In fact, a good example is Waldorf schools have that same creator and that same history. A lot of that history has been scrubbed from much of the translated biodynamic literature, so that's obviously how you end up with me, who has been around biodynamic practitioners for over 20 years, having never heard any of that. And it's also how you end up with wonderful growers and people like Jeff treating his farm like a single living organism, deriving much of his fertility from the farm and animals, and then generously describing how it works for us and then giving a lot of these preparations away for free. Perhaps obviously, neither Jeff nor I subscribe to any of Steiner's views on race, and Jeff has done a great job taking biodynamics in a very positive and abundant direction. Hopefully there will be something in here that you can use, something Steiner picked up from those peasant farmers that still has utility today, or if nothing else, perhaps this video with Jeff will provide a glimpse into what biodynamic practices look like in the field on a base level from one of my favorite people and growers and mentors. But I do think that historical context is important, and I appreciate our awesome comments section for pointing it out. Also, with full recognition that this is quite the ambitious intro, just a friendly warning that if you are vegan or vegetarian, biodynamic agriculture uses various parts of cattle and deer to make the preparations, and Jeff does detail those a bit here. That said, there are vegan and vegetarian practitioners who have developed their own versions of the preps that I'm sure you can find online, or at places like the Southeast Biodynamic Conference Jeff hosts every year, which has long been one of my favorite events. I've met so many great farmers there over the years, and it's at the beginning of October, so it's like this week. All right, that's enough for me. Here's Jeff Poppen of Long Hungry Creek Farm in Tennessee.
Besides recommending a return to holistic agriculture and looking at the farm as an enclosed system where each farm had the appropriate number of animals, crops, pastures, woodlands, wetlands, and all of this, Rudolf Steiner also recommended some preparations to help bring our worn out farms back to life. It won't surprise you that these are humus products. So when we make yogurt, we'll take a quart of warm milk and add a tablespoon of yogurt starter because we want the milk to turn into yogurt. Similarly, we're using humus products and adding them to our compost piles and potentizing them and sprinkling them on the farm in an effort to create a farm that's able to access all of the elements in the air, which are the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur to some extent, that are free. We don't buy these things. You never buy nitrogen or oxygen, carbon for your land. That comes from the air. When we have a humus soil, then the minerals in the ground become incorporated into some of the soil life. And they're in a colloidal state where they still won't wash away when it rains, but our plants can access them through ionic exchange. So we're going to start with some of the preparations that Rudolf Steiner recommended. The first one is cow manure that's been buried in a cow horn in October, dug up the next spring in May or so, end of May, and a small amount then is stirred vigorously in 3 gallons of warm water, and we take a whisk broom and sprinkle it, that water, on an acre of land. This is done in the spring and the fall before planting. If you look closely at this, you'll see the colloidal nature, all the little crumbs. Don't you wish our soils looked like that? Well, this helps our soils to look like this. It smears like this. See how it's greasy. That's a sign of a large amount of fungal activity, which is generally what our soils are lacking. We can get bacterial activity by manures and cover crops and stuff, but to get fungal activity is a little trickier. We use a lot of forest products. Wood chips that are decomposed for 10 or 15 years are a good example of something from the forest that'll have humus that we can then add to the compost piles, further incorporating it into the compost. This is called horn manure. The horn manure works with these earth elements. We put it on in the evening as the dew is falling, and we're using a homeopathic dose. This is a very small amount that's been potentized. So manure is the result of grass and clovers and forage being inside a cow's body for several weeks. After a few weeks of going through these 4 stomachs, it's excreted as a pudding, totally changed from grass, not in little balls that still have grass in it like horse manure, but actually a pudding. And this is what plants love. Cow manure is the ultimate fertilizer. So by potentizing this excellent manuring properties in the manure, we potentize it by burying it in a cow horn. Why a cow horn? Well, a cow has the horn on its head, and as the cow lives and digests, this, forces then go into those horns and are raised back into the digestive system. And so we take the manure and put it into a cow's horn and bury it during the winter months when the earth is most alive. The life in the summer that we see in all the greenness and everything is dormant and in the ground during the winter as a potential for next year's growth, and we want to enhance that potential. So we potentize the horn manure by stirring it vigorously in water. We go one direction for a half a minute, and then we go the other direction for a half a minute, and when we alternate chaos and the vortex and more chaos, another vortex, we get a potentizing effect that enhances the valuableness and effectiveness of the horn manure. So to balance this earthly and watery energy that we're promoting through the horn manure, we use another preparation that works with the air and the light and the warmth, the elements of the air, and helps to bring those into our farm. And the way we do this is we take quartz crystals and we grind them up. And this time we use a much smaller amount. These are quartz crystals that have been ground up and then buried in a cow horn during the summer months. This is stirred similarly to the horn manure, but it's stirred in the morning with 3 gallons of water and sprinkled on the plants as the sun is rising. And this preparation helps the plants to have strong stalks and to have a shine on the fruit, the skin, So silica works from the outside, the periphery inwards, whereas the calcium is working from the inside out. So the horn manure and calcium works from the inside, and the silica works from the outside. And this helps the plants to resist the problems because they have a good solid skin. Yeah. So the ultimate goal in biodynamic agriculture is the health of the human being. Everything starts from the human being, and we're not growing with in mind of having big yields or big things or making money. We're trying to grow the healthiest food possible for human consciousness. If you think about it, you know, if nitrogen is coming from our soils, from our own animals, and from the air above our soils, we're going to know more about our farm, and our consciousness will then be up to ante. If we're getting nitrogen from a bag and we're getting food from a grocery store, our consciousness drops down to a level where we don't communicate well. We're not able to really be full human beings. We also use preparations for the compost piles, and this is where we get a little specific into the elements. What do we need to grow crops? Well, people will say you need potassium and you need sulfur. So we look through Mother Nature, and where do we find potassium and sulfur in excellent form? We find it in the plant yarrow. So we clip off the little florets of the yarrow flowers and we stuff them into the bladder of a male deer, a stag's bladder, filled up with these flowers, buried for a year. That's just when we hang up for a part of the summer in the sun. Then we bury it in the soil, in real fertile soils, and the yarrow flowers inside the bladder transform into a new substance. And this is called the yarrow preparation. And we use this much of this preparation in a compost pile that can be as big as several rooms, you know. And you can see the little yarrow flowers in there, and this then will go into the compost pile and help the pile to assimilate potassium and sulfur and help the soils that the compost used on to free up the unavailable potassium and sulfur that is in the soils. Another preparation that we make is made from chamomile flowers. This time we're looking for not just potassium and sulfur, but we're interested in getting some calcium going, and so we look for a plant that has a good calcium content, and we find that in the chamomile flowers, which are then we clip off the flowers, and we stuff them into the intestines of a cow. Then we go to the small intestines, we get sections, cut them out about a foot long, and we stuff the sweet smelling, lovely yellow and white chamomile flowers into one of the most disgustingly odors that you can have, which is the cow's intestines. And it transforms into this, and this really helps to stabilize the nitrogen in the compost pile. Again, it's used in a compost pile, and very, very valuable. Another preparation that we use that works with silica and iron radiations and really almost all of the elements is a very valuable plant to have on your land. It's called a stinging nettle. It's edible, very good for you. A lot of protein and nutrition in it. And again, we've got something that smears really good. And this is the stinging nettle is just buried in the ground, and it transforms into this black stuff that really helps the compost and hence the soil become intelligent. Now, in any kind of growing of plants and stuff, we're going to come across plant diseases. So we have a prophylactic measure here to help combat diseases which are generally from a lack of live calcium. And so we want to get some live calcium, and we go to the white oak tree, scrape off some of the bark, which is, if you burned it, it would be 77% calcium. And so this live calcium in the oak bark then is stuffed into the skull cavity of a freshly killed cow. We scoop out the brains and put the ground up oak bark into that hole where the spinal cavity goes up into the brain, and then we bury this one in kind of a moist spot where water is trickling through the edge of a pond or creek. And then this transforms into this oak bark preparation that we add a small amount to the compost piles, and it helps get the calcium going and helps our plants that the compost is growing to be resistant to diseases. When we want the plant to draw stuff to itself, we want to use a plant that we have a lot of on most farms. It's a little messenger from heaven, and it's none other than the common dandelion. And this time we sew the dandelions up in little pillows made out of the mesentery, the stomach lining of a cow. So each of these preparations is an herb, and many of them have an animal organ involved. And these are things that only a human being will do, or think of even of doing. And what we have is a few sentences Steiner gives us on biological transmutation of elements, which was popularized by Curvin in 1962, but 40 some years before that, we have Steiner saying that with appropriate use of the compost and preparations on our farms, there's a hidden alchemy involved that helps the potassium and calcium transform into nitrogen, and this is the very nitrogen that we want to grow our crops in if we want to raise human consciousness. And so that transformation takes soil microbes, and these preparations and the compost then are homes for the soil microbes that allow for these transformations to happen. Last but not least, we use the flowers of valerian, and we simply press out the juice of the valerian flowers, the little florets, and we ferment it a little bit, and we get this really nice smelling preparation. We use a few eyedroppers full of this in the compost pile. Oftentimes we'll stir it for 15 or 20 minutes, going like this, to reactivate it. And this is not only dumped in the compost pile, but we may sprinkle a little bit over the top of the pile. And this helps with the element phosphorus, helps to mobilize the phosphorus, get the phosphorus microbes active and wanting to do their part. So another preparation that we might use is horsetail tea, which is simply something that we put an ounce or two in a few quarts of water and simmer for a while, and I'll also let that ferment, and then that's stirred and sprinkled on the plants as another not really antifungal, maybe pro-beneficial fungi. So we're not really against bacteria or fungi. Those are our helpers. Most of them are very good. There's a few of them that aren't good, but they usually, I think they all only grow in anaerobic conditions. And our whole process here is air in the soil. I want our soils to be 25% air, nothing. I want them to be that loose. I'd like them to be about 25% water and only 50% solid, and I'd like that 50% of solid to really, it should have 5% of that should be organic matter. And so these are called biodynamic preparations. They're available through your local biodynamic organizations or a national group called JPI that's located in Floyd, Virginia. And we put these all on our farm, and we have been for 40 years, and we make the preparations here on our farm. So we're one of the places that does that. We do it twice a year. There's a a nice fall gathering at the beginning of October every year, and then we have a spring gathering somewhere around Memorial Day, and a group of people that are interested in biodynamic agriculture come here, and we make these preparations, and then a year later, after they're finished, we let people have them. Once we have the appropriate minerals, the organic matter, and we can stimulate the biological activities, we can grow some dynamite food.
All right, I hope you all enjoyed that from Jeff. Remember, you can learn more about his biodynamic conferences and pick up a copy of his book by following the links in the show notes. Feel free to add your 2 cents to our wonderful comment section. Otherwise, like this video if you like this video. If you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And if you are subscribed, you're awesome. Another way to be awesome, you can pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook at no-tillgrowers.com, or a hat or other merch, or just join our Patreon page at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers. Or just hit that super thanks button. That works too. Be on the lookout this week. We are starting a new daily show. That will start on Monday. So super thanks to Jeff. Super thanks to you for watching. We'll see you later.